Chapter 4 Confidence You Aren't Asking Too Much. All too often, when things fall apart, we fall apart too. God isn't our first resort or even on the radar because we are too busy freaking out. If there's one thing we need to get into our heads, one habit we need to work on becoming routine, it is going to God knowing He is our hope. There is hope no matter how bad things look. 1 year ago, things were as bad as they could be between me and one of my children. This child was making choices that were devastating to my husband and me. In fact, almost exactly a year ago, I was speaking to a mom's group at Pastor Mike Novotny's church in Appleton, Wisconsin. I had spent the night at the home of a woman who opens her home regularly to me. As I was getting ready that morning, another of my children called to tell me what the other child was doing in my absence. My heart broke, but I had a whole day of ministry ahead of me. I spoke to the moms group and did an interview with Pastor Mike. In between those things, I had a chance to hang out with one of the camera operators for the interview. Because he's a nice guy and a good listener, I told him the situation. He assured me he would pray. Another friend met me after lunch, and we walked loops inside the church for almost an hour. She comforted me with details of her own child's rebellion and the life this child had years later following God. Shortly after that day, a couple from my church stopped by my house. Their child was not making good decisions either. Right then, we started praying. A few weeks later, we called more friends and asked them to gather, and we prayed for their child and my child and the other children who needed guidance and help just as much as ours. You can't imagine all that changed in just a few months. Drastic, almost unbelievable changes occurred in our children's lives. No matter what the situation and how dire it is, you can be confident it isn't too much for God. In fact, it is in the impossible that you realize just how much you need God. Your resources are terribly inadequate to fix anything. God is your only hope. The gospel writer Mark talks about an incident that occurred on the Sea of Galilee. It is of the we have suddenly happened upon disaster variety. Mark's account shows that even when things are completely out of control, it takes so very little for God to set them right. That day, when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." Chapter 4, verses 35 to 41. This account becomes a little more incredible when you remember that at least four of these disciples had formerly been experienced professional fishermen, and squalls were not uncommon on the Sea of Galilee. This storm was different. It was furious, violent, intense. The disciples were not being dramatic. They had done what they could do, and they thought they were going to die. 3 words stilled the storm. 3. And that shook the disciples as much as being in the storm. To go from thinking they were going to die to total calm in a matter of seconds requires a little recalibration. But not for Jesus, because he understood he would not die before his time. He, even in human form, with his power restrained, was in total control. Do you understand what that means for your life? Psalm 139:16 says, "Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Long before you took your first breath, God had already determined when you would take your last. You will never be in a situation that is beyond the scope and realm of God's power. No car or train or plane crash, no disease, no trauma, no storm. Do your prayers even matter then? Do you have to worry about putting your life in danger and shortening what otherwise may have been a long life? Can you binge on the wrong foods and beverages and live a sedentary lifestyle and take years off your life? Yes, yes, and yes. And God knew that you and I would do these things sometimes and took all these things into consideration when He wrote the number of our days in His book. That storm on the Sea of Galilee lasted only a brief time. It was overwhelming but short lived. It was a disaster averted. It was like a car careening towards you on a winter road that misses you by a few inches, or a 4-hour flight through a thunderstorm while you hang on for dear life but arrive shaken but whole. It's that incident when a child fell into the deep end of the pool but was rescued by someone who noticed and jumped in. If your brain works like mine, then you have to pause. You know the opposite scenarios: the car accident that wasn't averted and lives that were lost, the flights that went down instead of arriving safely at their destination, the child who fell in the pool but no one was there to notice and the body was pulled out of the water. If only this wasn't a sinful world where these things happen. Jesus healed a lot of people, but He didn't heal everyone. The Bible tells of the people He raised from the dead: a synagogue leader's daughter, a widow's son, and a man named Lazarus. But there were a lot of people who didn't get raised. Why her and not him? Why him and not her? Why did this tragedy come to this family and that tragedy go to theirs? Only God knows. I've heard it said that if everyone put their struggles in a pile for all to see, most people would keep their own pile. God determines what He allows into our lives and for how long. One person goes through something for 3 months, another goes through the same thing for a year, another struggles for decades. Only God knows why. Shortly after the account of the disciples in the storm, Mark records another impossible situation. This had been going on for considerably longer and caused a woman a great deal of pain. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind Him in the crowd and touched His cloak because she thought, if I just touch His clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from Him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," His disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at His feet and, trembling with fear, told Him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." If you read that quickly, you may have missed how awful this woman's life was. Bleeding made her ceremonially unclean. It's hard to imagine just how much this would affect her. Leviticus 15, verses 25 to 27 says, "When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time, other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge, just as in the days of her period. Any bed she lies on while her discharge continues will be unclean, as is her bed during her monthly period, and anything she sits on will be unclean, as during her period. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean until evening." To be friends with her would mean having to wash rigorously and be considered unclean. She couldn't just hug someone or get a reassuring tap or go to a friend's house and sit down without making the house unclean. I don't know what is going through your mind right now, but when I get to heaven, I'm going to find this woman and give her a long hug. She would have been shunned by many because to be near her or touch her would make them unclean, and that was too much work for most people. In addition to the isolation, she had suffered a great deal and had spent all she had on doctors who not only failed to help her, but made the suffering worse. How this woman had the wherewithal to go to Jesus is beyond me. Sheer desperation must have driven her because she was out of resources. Somehow she heard of Jesus, and despite the crowds, she went for it. She didn't need to touch Jesus, but she believed she did. The note in my study Bible says, although it needed to be bolstered by physical contact, her faith was rewarded. Bolstered means to support, strengthen, to prop up. She had the faith to go to Jesus, but in her mind, the healing would take place when and if she touched his clothes. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. The woman who had a moment of courage suddenly trembled with fear when Jesus made her tell her story. You might ask why Jesus did this. First, so there would be no doubt how she had been healed. Many doctors had tried to cure her, and she had received many treatments. Jesus would get the glory from the healing, not them. After so many years, many of those present probably knew who she was and treated her as an object of scorn because of her condition. They needed to hear she was healed. And even more important than all these things, the word Jesus used for healed actually means saved. When Jesus called her daughter, a term he only used that one time, and told her to go in peace, he not only referred to her physical condition, but her spiritual salvation. The act of healing her convinced her that Jesus wasn't just a healer, but the Son of God and her Savior. Jesus gave the woman even more than she knew to ask for, and far more than she knew she needed. And it happened with just the touch of a cloak. How many people were saved because of what they saw that day? When you and I struggle through hardships, it can be difficult to see any good that could come from the bad. But this woman's account is still reinforcing our faith today, 2,000 years later. If Jesus healed her, he can heal my marriage. If Jesus healed her, there's hope for your wandering son. If Jesus healed her when no one else could, then he certainly can fix the broken in our lives too. Sometimes after a certain amount of time, some people quit praying. 4 or 9 or 15 years has passed. If God was going to answer that prayer, wouldn't he have done so by now? God works in his time frame, not ours. Before you quit praying, remember, Abraham waited for a son for 25 years. David was anointed king long before he took the throne, and he was king of Little Hebron for 7 years before he reigned over all Israel. 2 Samuel 5, verses 4 and 5. In fact, let this serve as an incentive to reignite your prayer life. What are your biggest fears, disappointments, and grievances? Start praying today for resolution, even a miracle. There's one other account I want to look at that is pertinent to this topic. Matthew records the plight of another woman in a desperate circumstance. She wasn't asking for herself, but on behalf of her daughter who was suffering terribly. So, despite the fact that she was a non Jew and Jesus was surrounded by men, she boldly went to him for help. Look at her story. A Canaanite woman from the vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. This woman's cries went unheard and unanswered. Instead of receiving compassion, she was treated like a mosquito that needed a good swat. Her desperation did nothing to move Jesus to action, but she was unfazed and undeterred. The disciples encouraged Jesus to send her away, but she came back. Jesus told her no, and she asked, "Why not?" He gave her a reason, and she appealed to God's mercy. If the dogs get crumbs, then Lord, I am more than good with that. Your crumbs, like the edge of your cloak and just 3 words from your mouth, can do infinitely more than anyone on earth can promise or provide. How many of your prayers are in the dustbin of heaven because you're intimidated? You're right, Lord, I'm a lousy choice. I probably couldn't do that. Says who? Well, this person hasn't given me a chance and that opportunity didn't work out. So what? Go back and ask for crumbs, whatever that means in your case. This woman didn't stop, and neither should you. Not if what you are praying for is worth praying for. Are you praying for changed hearts and more people in heaven? Keep praying. Are you praying for more opportunities to share the gospel? Even if half of hell comes against you, keep praying. Jesus himself said, "Open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest." John 4:35. Are you praying for healing, to overcome depression, to get past pain? Never give up and never, ever quit praying for your spouse, your children, your parents, your siblings, your church, your country. Do not cower and do not give up, even when someone or many people scoff or laugh or tell you to give up. Nothing stopped that Canaanite woman, and nothing should stop you. Jesus wasn't perturbed with her. He was astonished. Woman, you have great faith. She believed impossible things could happen, and because of it, her impossible came true. Do you have that kind of faith? 3 words, a touch of a cloak, and a few crumbs changed the lives of those who went to Jesus for help. It is not too much to go before God confidently and ask anything of him.